They say the song of a siren is beautiful only to those she intends to destroy. To the rest of the world, it is simply silence. For the past 5 years, living within the gilded cage of the Prescott family, I had been singing the most beautiful, intricate, and utterly silent song. They called me Elena, Michael's tragic, lovely little wife. The quiet art historian he'd inexplicably plucked from a dusty university library and draped in the family diamonds. They looked at my quiet demeanor, my soft-spoken nature, and they saw a dove, a gentle creature to be patronized and tolerated. They never once thought to look for the hawk's shadow, to check for the sharpness of my talons. My story, the one they all believed, began at my husband's funeral. It was a grotesquely opulent affair in a cathedral of cold stone and colder sentiment. The air was thick and cloying with the funereal scent of thousands of white lily, a scent I now associate with hypocrisy. I played the part of the grieving widow to perfection. I wore a veil of delicate black lace, a fragile shield between my calculated calm and their performative grief. I allowed my mother-in-law, the family's ice queen matriarch, Catherine Prescott, to steer me by the elbow, her crocodile skin shoes making sharp, impatient clicks on the marble floor. I accepted the condescending pats on the hand from my sister-in-law, Claire, whose eyes, even in mourning, held the predatory glint of a vulture circling a fresh kill. They mourned the loss of their golden heir, the future king of their financial empire, Sterling Enterprises. I mourned the loss of my co-conspirator. Michael was no fool. He was a prince born into a nest of beautifully dressed vipers, and he knew the chemical composition of their venom better than anyone. From the very beginning of our love story, another, darker story was being written in secret in the hushed, paneled offices of the most ruthless estate lawyers in New York, a story of ironclad trusts, of offshore holdings, of impenetrable legal firewalls. He knew his family's greed was a terminal illness, passed down like their blue eyes and their casual cruelty. So, together, we designed the cure. I remember the night he showed me the final documents. The city lights glittered like a fallen constellation outside the windows of our West Village brownstone. He spread the papers across the table, his finger tracing the legalese. "This, Ellie," he said, tapping a clause, "is the heart of it. The irrevocable trust. Irrevocable. It means not even a god can undo it once I'm gone. It means it's yours. It means they can't touch you. They can't touch Lily. When I'm gone," he had continued, his voice low and steady, "they will come for you. They will not see you as my wife, the mother of my child. They will see you as a line item to be deleted, a temporary inconvenience to be swept away." He had smiled then, a sad, brilliant smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Let them. Their arrogance is the key to our entire plan. They will never, ever see you coming. His death wasn't the end of our story. It was the trigger." As I stood by his graveside, a portrait of elegant sorrow, accepting empty condolences from men, whose primary concern was the stock market's reaction, I wasn't just a widow. I was the executor of his final, brilliant masterpiece of revenge. My grief was a real and physical thing, a cold, heavy stone in my chest. But grief, I had learned, can be a weapon. It can be a cloak of invisibility. And beneath it, my hand was perfectly steady dot in the week that followed. The whispers in the hallowed halls of their Upper East Side mansion grew louder. They called me the gold digger, the interloper. Claire openly speculated on how little they could get away with paying me off. Richard, my father-in-law, the stoic patriarch, simply looked through me, his mind already calculating the financial gymnastics of reabsorbing Michael's assets. I was a ghost in their house, silent and observant. I watched them plot the dismantling of my life, utterly oblivious to the fact that they were merely actors in a play I had been rehearsing for years. They saw a woman adrift on a vast, lonely ocean, a pretty ship with broken sails. They had no idea I was the one controlling the tides. Asterisk, the day they came to banish me was a Tuesday. It was clinical, brutal, and executed with the chilling efficiency of a corporate downsizing. Catherine and Claire arrived at the brownstone unannounced, their faces set in masks of grim purpose. "Elena," Catherine began, her voice devoid of warmth as she surveyed the living room Michael and I had filled with art, books, and laughter. "We've made arrangements. The house, of course, is a Prescott family asset registered under a holding company. We will need you to vacate within 30 days. Claire, ever the helpful sister, slid a bank check across the polished surface of our coffee table. $1 million. A severance, she called it, a malicious little smirk playing on her lips. To help you get back on your feet, a gesture of goodwill. We trust you'll be discreet. It would be so unseemly to have any public unpleasantness." Her tone implied that my entire existence was an unpleasantness they were finally scrubbing clean. I looked at the check. The price of my silence. The price of my husband's memory. I felt a cold, clean rage crystallize in my veins. But my face showed only a mask of weary, sorrowful acceptance. This was a crucial scene. I had to play my part to perfection. "Of course," I whispered, looking down at my hands as if they were the most interesting things in the world. "I understand completely." Their shared sigh of relief was almost comical. The little dove was not going to fight. The problem was being resolved with minimal fuss. What they didn't know, what Michael's brilliant lawyer, Mr. Harrison, had confirmed to me in a hushed phone call the day after the funeral, was that the deed to this house, this beautiful brownstone filled with our life together, had been transferred solely and directly into my name 2 years prior. It was an outright, notarized gift. Legally, I could have had them removed by security for trespassing, but that would have been showing my hand too soon. That would have been a skirmish, and I was preparing for a war. A true siren doesn't scream when the sailors mock her from the deck. She sings softly, luring the ship closer, ever closer to the unseen rocks. So I packed our bags. I let them watch as I took only my clothes, my personal books, and my daughter Lily's toys. I let them think they were stripping me bare, reducing me to nothing. We moved into a small, anonymous 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, with a view of a brick wall and the constant roar of the elevated train for a soundtrack. The change was designed to be jarring from bespoke elegance to cramped functionality. To any observer, it was a tragic, pitiful fall from grace. To me, it was a command center, a listening post. It was my camouflage. For 6 months, I lived in strategic exile. I took a part-time job cataloging art for a small gallery in Soho, losing myself in the quiet histories of other people's creations. I took Lily to the park, pushed her on the swings, and bought her ice cream from a truck, living the life of a normal, struggling single mother. I spoke to my neighbors about the weather. I learned the rhythms of a life lived far from the rarefied air of the Upper East Side, and all the while, I watched. I read the business pages, tracking the movements of Sterling Enterprises. I saw a photo of Claire in a society magazine, laughing at a charity gala, dripping in diamonds. I watched Richard on a financial news program, his face a mask of supreme confidence as he announced record profits. They were untouchable, living, in a world of their own making, a world where I no longer existed. They had deleted the line item. They had forgotten all about the quiet, grieving widow. They had forgotten the most important rule of the ocean. It is the silent, patient deep that holds the most power. And I was waiting calmly and quietly for the tide to turn. The summons came on a crisp October morning. The autumn sunlight, thin and golden, sliced through the window of my queen's apartment. The summons wasn't a court document, but a polite, formal email from Mr. Harrison, his language as precise and impenetrable as a legal fortress. He was writing to inform me that a special meeting of the board of directors of Sterling Enterprises had been called for the following Wednesday. The agenda: to formally settle the estate of the late Michael Prescott and ratify the transfer of his shares into the primary family trust. My presence, as Michael's next of kin and the mother of his only heir, was firmly required. The time had come. A slow, cold thrill moved through me. The waiting was over. The period of quiet observation, of gathering strength in the shadows, was at an end. Now, the performance, the final act of our long play, would begin. "Are you ready, Elena?" Mr. Harrison had asked when I called to confirm my attendance. His voice was calm, but I could hear the undercurrent of anticipation. He was one of the few who knew the whole score. "Your husband was a master strategist. He trusted you implicitly to see this to its conclusion." "I'm ready," I said, and the words felt like steel in my mouth. For 6 months, I had worn the camouflage of a struggling single mother, sensible shoes, unassuming clothes, an air of gentle melancholy. Now I had to choose my armor for the final act. I went through my closet, past the muted colors and soft fabrics, and found the dress I had saved for this very day. It was a dress Michael had bought for me on a trip to Milan, simple, black, impeccably tailored silk that fell just below the knee. I had rejected a power suit, too obvious, too much of a challenge. I had rejected anything softer, too much like a victim. This dress was different. It was not a dress of mourning. It was a dress of command. It was the kind of dress you wear to sign a treaty or to watch an empire burn to the ground. That morning, as I got ready, I thought of the promise I had made to Michael. It was burned into my memory. We had just come from a tense family dinner where Catherine had made a series of thinly veiled insults about my education and my background. I had been hurt, and later that night, Michael had held me close. "Don't let them see your fire, Ellie," he had whispered, his voice fierce. "Not yet. Bank it. Let it grow hotter in the dark. Compress it into something unbreakable. One day, you will have so much power they will feel the heat from a mile away, and they won't even know what's burning them. Promise me you'll see it through. Promise me you'll be strong enough." "I promise," I had said. Now, standing in my small queen's apartment, I looked at my reflection. The face looking back was no longer that of the hurt, uncertain girl. From that evening, it was a woman, a queen in exile, about to reclaim her throne. I felt no fear, only a profound, chilling sense of purpose. My grief for Michael had been the coal, and my patience had been the immense pressure of the deep earth. What was left was a diamond, hard and sharp and ready to cut. I braided my hair back, sleek and severe. My makeup was minimal, my only jewelry, the simple gold wedding band Michael had placed on my finger. I was not there to be beautiful. I was there to be indelible. The journey from Queens to Midtown Manhattan on the subway was a journey between worlds. I stood packed amongst the commuters, the students, the everyday people of the city, their lives of vibrant, chaotic tapestry. Then I emerged into the cathedral of glass and steel that was Midtown and entered the Sterling Enterprises tower. The air changed. It became rarefied, silent, heavy with the scent of money and power. As the elevator ascended with silent speed, I felt myself transforming. I was crossing the threshold. I was the siren rising from the waves, ready to sing. My song, asterisk, the boardroom of Sterling Enterprises, was on the 60th floor, a glass-walled cage in the sky designed to make a man feel like a god. A panoramic view of Manhattan stretched out below, the city reduced to a toy set. The table was a vast, polished slab of mahogany, so reflective I could see the distorted, confident faces of the board members in its surface. The art on the walls. Was museum quality a Rothko here, a de Kooning there, pieces I had helped Michael choose? A bitter irony that tasted like victory. Seated around the table were the titans of the Prescott Empire. Richard, the patriarch, at its head, his face a granite mask of authority. Catherine, his wife, a silent jeweled cobra at his side, her very stillness a form of aggression. Claire, my sister-in-law, scrolling idly through her phone, the picture of bored entitlement. And a half-dozen other stern-faced men in expensive suits, men who managed billions and had ice in their veins. They all looked up as I entered with Mr. Harrison. Their surprise was visible, a collective, subtle flinch, followed by a flicker of annoyance. I was an unwelcome ghost at their feast, a loose end they thought they had already tied up. I took the empty seat indicated by the lawyer, my back straight, my hands folded calmly on the table. I said nothing. The silence was my opening statement. Richard. Prescott cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the hushed room. He was impatient to begin, to conclude this final piece of unpleasant business. Harrison, let's get this over with. We're here to ratify the absorption of Michael's shares into the primary family trust, as per the corporate bylaws, to be administered by myself and the board. Mr. Harrison, a pillar of calm, opened a thick, leather-bound folder. There is a slight complication with that, Richard, he said, his voice mild but carrying an unmistakable weight. Michael's shares are not, in fact, subject to the corporate bylaws. A murmur went through the room. Richard frowned, his heavy brows drawing together. What are you talking about? He was a signatory to the family charter. He was. Mr. Harrison agreed smoothly. However, the charter is superseded by his personal estate planning. 3 years ago, Michael established a private, irrevocable trust. The air in the room grew still. Irrevocable. The word hung in the air, a death knell to their plans. A trust outside their control, outside their reach. Claire finally looked up from her phone. And who, exactly, is the beneficiary of this private trust? She asked, her voice dripping with a suspicion that was rapidly turning to alarm. The sole beneficiary, Mr. Harrison said, pausing for a perfect, devastating beat, is Michael's daughter, Lily Wallace Prescott. Catherine let out a sharp, strangled gasp. I saw her hand, laden with rings, clutch the arm of her chair. They had been disinherited by a 4-year-old. But the lawyer wasn't finished. This was merely the first wave to crash against their hull. Richard, ever the pragmatist, was already calculating, his mind working through the permutations. A child. So the shares are managed by a court-appointed administrator. A manageable complication. We can work with that. Mr. Harrison gave a slight, almost regretful shake of his head. Not exactly. According to the articles of the trust, Michael appointed a sole executive trustee, vested with full and absolute voting power over all shares, effective immediately upon his death. He looked around the table, letting the weight of his next words gather. He looked directly at me, a brief confirmatory glance, and then back at the stunned faces of the family. The trustee he appointed, he said, his voice ringing with the final clear note of a bell that signals a verdict, is his wife, Mrs. Elena Wallace Prescott. Silence. A deep, profound, tectonic silence as the world shifted on its axis. I watched their faces, one by one, savoring the slow-motion demolition. Claire's smugness dissolved into a pale, slack-jawed horror. The board members exchanged panicked, uncomprehending glances. Richard's hand, reaching for his glass of water, trembled almost imperceptibly. His face, usually a mask of command, had turned the color of old ash, and Catherine. Her face was a perfect, beautiful portrait of disbelief curdling into pure, undiluted rage. No, she finally whispered, the word a venomous hiss, a snake striking at glass. It's a trick. This little nobody, she tricked him. I met her gaze across the gleaming, empty expanse of the mahogany table. For the very first time, I let her see it. Not the grief, not the weakness, not the dove. I let her see the fire she had never believed existed, and I gave her a small, slow, merciless smile. The ship had struck the rocks, and I was the only one left standing on the shore. The chaos that erupted was everything I had anticipated. It was not loud shouting, but the choked, furious sound of absolute power being lost. Accusations were thrown like darts: undue influence, forgery, incompetence. Voices were raised, tight with panic. It was the sound of a dynasty breaking apart from the inside out. Through it all, I remained silent, a calm island in their churning, impotent storm. Mr. Harrison calmly presented the document, signature after signature, notarized. Seal after notarized seal, each one a nail in their coffin. The paperwork was an iron fortress. It was beautiful when the shouting finally subsided into exhausted, ragged breaths, and the board members were looking at Richard for guidance he no longer possessed. I spoke for the first time. My voice was quiet, yet it cut through the tension. Like a shard of glass, there will be order, I said. All eyes snapped to me. It was the first time I had ever addressed them as anything but a deferential subordinate, and the effect was electric. They looked at me as if I had suddenly grown claws. Richard stared at me, his face a ruin of its former authority. "What do you want, Elena?" he asked, his voice hollow, the question of a defeated king. "Want?" I tilted my head, allowing a small pitying smile to touch my lips. "That's a word for people who lack power, Richard. I don't want anything. I am here to assume my role as appointed by my husband. My role as the guardian of his legacy and the primary shareholder of this corporation." I slid a single piece of paper across the table towards him. It was a formal motion, drafted by Mr. Harrison and signed by me. Claire, nearest to it, snatched it before he could. She read it, her eyes widening in disbelief. "You can't be serious. What is it?" Catherine demanded, her voice shrill. "She's calling for a full, independent forensic audit," Claire stammered, reading the words as if they were in a foreign language, "of all corporate divisions stretching back 5 years, with a special focus on the acquisitions department and the European luxury ventures." The acquisitions department was Richard's personal kingdom. The European ventures were Claire's pet project, a portfolio known for its extravagant expenses and questionable returns. It was not a proposal. It was a declaration of war. It was. A surgeon's scalpel aimed directly at the rot I knew was festering at the heart of their empire. I was giving them notice. The age of secrets was over. Transparency is the foundation of trust. I added calmly, my voice resonating with an authority they were just beginning to comprehend. "Before we can move forward, we must have a clear, an honest understanding of our current position. I'm sure none of you have anything to hide." I stood up then, the silk of my dress whispering in the suddenly silent room. I gathered my purse. Catherine stood as well, her body trembling with a rage she could no longer contain. "You will not get away with this," she hissed. I paused at the door and looked back at her, at all of them. "Get away with what, Catherine?" I asked, my voice soft. "Securing my daughter's future? Honoring my husband's last wishes? No, I believe I already have." I walked to the door, with Mr. Harrison following. I didn't look back again. I didn't need to. I could feel their stunned, impotent fury burning into my back. It was a warmth I had waited a very long time to feel. As the elevator descended from. The heavens of their power. I looked at my reflection in the polished steel doors. The siren song was over. The great gilded ships of the Prescott family were wrecked upon the shore. But this was not an ending. It was a coronation. They had underestimated me because I was quiet. They had mistaken my patience for passivity. They never understood that the most dangerous power is the one you never see until it's too late. I had not just inherited a fortune or a company. I had inherited a throne, and I would rule. Not with their brand of loud, brittle cruelty, but with the silent, inescapable, and patient strength of the deep. It was the last promise I had made to my husband. It was the first decree of my new reign, and I was just getting started.